Now, if you're South African, you know full well that SARS is the only government department that actually operates. It's the only one that works. And it works so well that SARS could probably be viewed as world class. We most likely have one of the most efficient revenue service collection programs in the world. In fact, SARS is one of the few sort of national revenue collectors that can directly dive into your account and take whatever they want. They can take assets, they can take pretty much whatever they want, and they can do this fast. In some cases, they will do this before you've even had the opportunity to respond to their assessments. SARS sends out these assessments to people if they have not filed the relevant information, and then they take the money. This can lead to businesses closing down because they literally just have their bank accounts cleared out. It can lead to people going bankrupt and having to declare bankruptcy as a result of this. But most importantly, and the thing that I think makes SARS such an incredibly evil organization in the South African sense, and it's not that SARS is evil. All governments need money, and all governments get that money through taxation. And in order to get the tax, they need an organization that can collect this tax. And an efficient tax collector is a good thing in general. The problem in South Africa is that the South African public is overtaxed. In fact, in South Africa, we have probably one of the worst tax efficiency ratings in the world. This rating effectively means for every rand that the government takes from you, how much do you get back in terms of services? And in South Africa, that's between 10 and 1%. I kid you not. Most people will see none or almost none of their tax money actually being spent on services that they themselves utilize. And it kind of does make sense. The majority of taxes in this country, well over 90%, is paid by just 7 million people. And while there are other groups that are also paying tax, although their taxes are usually not recognized as part of the tax base because it's so little, that group, even if you remove them, South Africa wouldn't suffer greatly because they don't contribute that much to the tax system overall. The big part of the South African fiscus is driven by just over 7 million people. Remember, we're a country of 60 million. This means that 7 million people are basically holding up and supplying about 53 million people with everyday services. This goes from things like unemployment benefits to things like cleaning up the streets, policing the areas of people who can't pay taxes, as well as just massive grants that's given to people. And then, of course, the big one that has been in the news now for a while is healthcare. And apparently, we also provide healthcare to anyone from Africa that just happens to cross our non-existent borders because our borders may as well not exist. This puts a significant strain on the already shrinking tax base. What's more is that this government has increasingly pushed up the tax rates until we are now at a point where there is just no more room to push up. The taxpayer in South Africa is already under so much pressure just to pay the already existing tax that when the government announced that they're going to increase VAT even further, there was absolute mayhem. In fact, there was so much pushback from the South African public that even the ANC eventually turned around and said, what a terrible idea, even though they were the ones who proposed the idea in the first place, right? That should tell you something about where the South African public is. Now, an interesting thing here is that there's a new tax warning now for South Africans. Now, this is mainly for investors, and you'll think immediately, but hold on, Stefan. I'm not an investor. Even though you might have a couple of bucks put in the stock market, we're obviously talking about large investors here. The kind of people that can move massive investments into collective investment schemes in order to circumvent paying taxes on it, because we have this loophole in our tax system. One of the interesting things, though, and I'm not going to try and explain this to you. I've read through this article about 4 times now, and I still don't fully understand the legalese of what is happening here. All you have to know is South Africa has capital gains tax, which I actually think is incredibly evil as a tax system because you've already taxed the income, so the money that actually bought the shares. Now you're also taxing the returns on those shares. And no one has, as of yet, been able to explain to me why the government has a right to tax these gains, right? The government did nothing for these gains. In fact, in South Africa, the government is the one that hinders these gains, not helps them grow. But then again, I have the same sort of relationship with income tax. I know people like to make moralistic claims about, oh, we all have to sacrifice in order to take care of the people. But that still doesn't explain to me why it's suddenly not theft when you take what is mine that you did not earn, but because the government is the one taking it, that somehow makes it okay. I've never understood that, and I will continue to not understand that. I think income tax, personal income tax specifically, is an incredible evil and should be abolished. I don't believe that it should exist. But what's interesting is the amount of loopholes that are created and exploited within the South African tax system. Now, loopholes are not created by the government, although some loopholes do exist by the government in order to incentivize people to give to charities, for example. You want that loophole because you want people to give to charities because charities do important work, right? So some loopholes exist because the government made them. Other loopholes are found, right? You have people who spend all of their days just poring over the legalese of SARS and the tax collection system to figure out where can they put their money in order to get it out of the hands of government. And what you usually find is countries with an oppressive tax regime will have far more loopholes that are consistently exploited. In the UK, for example, they had over 75% wealth tax at one point in time. And what they found was as soon as they lowered the wealth tax from 75%, I think it went down to 40%, their revenue returns actually increased. Because suddenly investors were like, oh, wait, I'm not losing 75% of money. Okay, I don't have to exploit as many loopholes. I'm now willing to give the government a little bit more. Now, what I want to focus on instead here, because as I said, this is basically just SARS tightening up their rules to close this loophole. And by the way, the government is jumping through every possible hoop to close loopholes. If you read through this article as well, SARS is now creating a new bill or have proposed a new bill that will allow South Africans to ask for a postponement of payment before they have to pay the assessments that SARS make. But then there's a bunch of new loopholes that SARS is also trying to close. The same goes on in this article here. Just loophole after loophole after loophole. And basically, Treasury has been engaged for about 5 years now, endlessly trying to close all of the tax loopholes that continuously open up as they're trying to get water out of a rock because the South African public just has nothing left. Here's what people don't understand, and obviously what our government doesn't understand. There is no tax on earth that can be charged on any group of people that will not ultimately be paid by the poor and the middle class. None. Zero. Doesn't matter what the tax is. The poor and the middle class will ultimately end up paying for it. You see, socialists and communists like to say, tax the rich, right? Let's take the money of the rich. What they don't understand and what they don't calculate for is that the rich isn't just some abstract thing. They have agency. They're people. They're people that don't want to lose their crap. If I came to you and I said, I want to take 90% of your crap, you're going to try and find a way to not give me 90% of your crap. That's just how it works, right? So the rich has agency and they don't want to pay their money to the government, specifically in South Africa, where most of that money will never come back to them and will end up in the bank accounts of government officials that are beyond corrupt. So what ends up happening, effectively, you have to understand it like this. There are three groups, broadly speaking, in a society. The first is the poor and the criminal class. They don't pay any taxes because they're criminals or they're poor. The second is the inelastic group. These are people whose income is inelastic. They're wage earners or people that operate within a very competitive sector of society. And then you have the elastic earning group. These are your millionaires and your billionaires. Now, if you increase taxes like personal income tax on the middle class, they have no other option but to pay that tax because they're getting a salary. They have no way to increase that salary, at least not an immediate. There's indirect ways, but there's no immediate way to increase that salary. And so they'll just have to take the hit and pay more tax. For the elastic group, the billionaires and the millionaires, they're the ones that own everything. They're the ones that own Pick and Pay, Checkers, Spar, and every other business that you go to, every car sale, every car that you buy, you're helping some billionaire or millionaire getting richer and richer and richer. Now, when the government proposes a tax on that group, if that group made 100 billion rand profit, let's use Checkers here, right? Imagine Checkers made 100 billion rand profit last year, and suddenly the government moves in and says, hey, we're going to tax you 60%. So we're going to take 60 billion of that for us, and you get to keep 40 billion. Checkers does not want to make just 40 billion. Checkers wants to make 100 billion, and year after year, they want to make more. So what does Checkers do? Well, they don't just take that. Checkers is owned by people. Chris Duvisa, I believe that's his name, is the owner of Checkers. Chris Duvisa has a brain. He has the ability to think. And the immediate call goes out, increase prices on everything. Slowly, we're not going to do it overnight, but slowly over the next 5 years, we're going to increase taxes incrementally until we get back to 100 billion rand in profit and then exceed it. So what ends up happening is, while yes, the rich were taxed, technically, the rich will just take those taxes and pass it off to the people below them. This is why wealth taxes, capital gains taxes, income taxes are so incredibly evil, because the people who end up paying all of those taxes are the poor. Always. There is no exception to this. Now, you could have a government that tries to interfere and tries to stop prices from increasing, but ultimately the government doesn't have the reach, not even in countries like China, right, where you have a communist government. Do they have the reach to really keep that under wraps? This is why a lot of countries have found lower taxes actually end up being a lot better in general. The government starts making a lot more money from the taxes because most people aren't trying to exploit the tax system, and people are more than happy to pay their fair share in taxes. But also, prices come down. The economy starts to grow. Jobs are created. Ultimately, this is the one thing in South Africa that our government doesn't understand. They are attacking ordinary South Africans by trying to shift the blame to the rich. Trying to say, but we're only taxing the rich. Yes, the rich are the ones supplying most of the jobs, most of the businesses, because it's not just prices. They'll increase prices at Checkers. They'll fire people. They'll downscale in terms of employment. They'll do everything that is within their power to get back to 100 billion. Because ultimately, they want to make money. And you might now sit there as not a billionaire and say, well, screw them. But if you were a billionaire, you would be doing the exact same thing. Why? Because you're human. No one likes losing stuff. The government needs to wake up and realize that what they're currently doing, they are killing ordinary South Africans. And if they continue to do so, South Africa will just continue to suffer. When you look at our shares, right? You look at the share of the stock market in South Africa, it's down. Yes, it was at an all-time high, but that was because of the GNU. Just earlier today, I read this article again from the Daily Investor that shows that South Africa may have reached the end of the GNU hype. As investors are now looking at the data, the economic data coming out of South Africa, and seeing, wait, the GNU didn't fix anything. Homelessness is still as high as it's ever been. Unemployment is still as high as it's ever been. The economy isn't growing at all. In fact, it's even worse than it was last year. So investors are starting to go, well, all of this money that we put into South Africa was for naught. And then they're going to start taking their money out of South Africa. And then all of these gains that we thought we were making, they're going to disappear because investors, especially the ones keeping the stock market afloat, they're not interested in South Africa as a patriotic duty. They're interested in growth. And if South Africa cannot apply that or supply that growth, they'll just go find it somewhere else. Anyways, I wanted to bring this to you guys because I felt it was important. It is important. It's important that you guys know what's happening in the economy. If you like what I do and you want more people to have access to what I do, please consider hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, and also leaving a comment in the comment section down below because it does truly help. Massive shout out and thank you to all of the patrons and the YouTube channel members. You guys help me do what I do and continue pushing this channel forward so that we can get more people working on this and bring you more accurate and original stories every single day. So thank you so much for that. To become a patron, hit the link in the description down below or just click the join button right below this video. As always, be good to each other, be kind to each other, and I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.